much. Our veterans have assembled here. Be free also to use the facilities if need to, which is out around to the corner to us and off to the right. There's more water and cookies and apples out there as well. But we want to mention our tremendous gratitude to the two organizations which are mentioned in the program, the Miami County Foundation and the Piqua Community Foundation. For without them, much of this could not take place in funding of so much that goes on here. And that wonderful young lady down at the end of the table there, Dr. Vivian Blevins, demands a round of applause for putting this all together. At this point, my name is Carl DeSantis, and I'm introduced later, so just forget that name, you'll get it later. But I'm going to introduce Steve Sykes to us at this point for our invocation.
For all those that are able, I'd like for you to stand and bow our heads and move prayer. Our merciful Father, we are gathered this afternoon to honor all our veterans, our active military personnel, and especially those who served in World War II. We acknowledge that their service enables us to walk as free men and women in a great land. We humbly ask your blessings as we pay homage to our veterans who served our country in honor and dignity, to express our gratitude for their bravery and self-sacrifice, and for those among us today and for those in past generations. This nation of ours is built by both natives and this soil and people from all over the world, and is a continual voyage towards its purpose. May we at no time and at cost let down the brave men and women who served in defense of America, for those who are serving today, and most of all for those who gave their complete sacrifice by defending and upholding the values of liberty, protecting the inherent dignity of human life, leading the world by example through our righteous conduct, compassion, and tolerance that we may show to each other regardless of religion, ethnicity, color, and gender. Because of these veterans, we are free to worship you and to serve our country without oppression. Anywhere there is inequality, we are free to fight for justice. Anywhere there is silence, we are free to speak. Anywhere there is hatred, we are free to embrace. We ask today that you will lift up by your Spirit those who are now at war, encourage and heal those in hospitals, and mending their wounds at home, guard those in any need of trouble, hold safely in your hands all military families, and bring the returning troops to a joyful reunion and a tranquil life at home. Give to us, your people, grateful hearts, and united that we will honor these men and women and hold them always in our love, our prayers, until your world is perfected in peace and all world wars cease. For all this we ask in Jesus' name, and all God's people said, Amen.
And today I stand here to salute those who Tom Brokaw calls the greatest generation, and indeed they are. My late father, Captain Ralph DeSantis, would be 98 years old were he here today. And I just know that he would appreciate being here with his band of brothers as well. We have several speakers today. I want to mention those beautiful flowers down there in front of Vivian are going to go to Edith for Les and for Pat Ashburn as well for Harry. And we'll hear from most of our guests here this morning. First of all, alphabetical order, according to your program before you, I'd like to introduce Mr. Marion Adams, U.S. Navy Radioman First Class on the beaches of Normandy.
I understand I have 10 minutes. I want my key card. This is mine. Now I'll sit there. I'll This is my note card. I don't make speeches. I remember everything that went on. I joined the Navy when I was 17. 1942. I had to wait 8 months to get in. By then I turned 19. I ended up at Northwestern University to learn Morse code and the theory, and then I had to learn to type. They told me I was a radioman. I'm just a farm boy, but now I'm a radioman. I ended up on the Solomon's Marion, and they put me on an LST. I didn't know what an LST was. I do now. They're the ones that bow doors open. The ramp comes down. We deliver stuff on the beaches, including men. 98% of the materials the Army used in France was put there by our secret weapon, the LST. The Germans didn't know about it. They do now. I was on, of the 5 beaches, which included nearly 70 miles in the bay on the north side of France. There was 5 landings: Utah, Omaha, Sword, Juneau. The Sword is the last one. Gold is after Juneau, or after, I get my key card out. But Sword was the British beach. Juneau and Omaha was the American beaches. I was on 4 of those 5 beaches the first 12 days of the Normandy invasion. Literally, I walked around on them. I was twice at Omaha. On day 1, I was supposed to beach, first wave. We took in 101st Airborne. People all think 101st flew behind the lines. They didn't. Part of them. But this was run over. People that didn't have room on the gliders and C-47, we took. They came to my ship. My ship was supposed to be in the first wave on Omaha. That's where they wanted to be. They wanted to be there to meet their buddies coming in that were behind the lines. I don't know how many of them made it. Very few. There was more than 2,000 killed on Omaha Beach that morning. I'm lucky. I came back. Ships were sank on both sides. I never even got a Purple Heart. I didn't need one. I didn't swim in salt water. I didn't have to. But I got back. From Omaha Beach that morning, no ships, LSTs, ever landed on Omaha on D-Day. We set off behind a Texas battleship, about 200 yards, until 3 in the afternoon. The beachmaster called me on the radio. I was a radio man now, Morse code and all. And they told us to go to Utah. We went to Utah. And there we picked up some of our troops. We couldn't land there because there was too many LSDs. On Utah, I have a souvenir. Americans are souvenir hunters. This is a swastika. I took off of a German prisoner of war on my ship on D-Day. One of the prisoners spoke English. He had an Iron Cross. I couldn't get it. I gave this soldier 2 Lucky Strike cigarettes for this emblem, the swastika. When I was taking it off with a knife, they're all glued on. Every German soldier wears them, officers and all. I was taking it off with a knife, and the one next to him said something to him. He nodded his head. After it was over, I asked him, "What did you say to him?" He said, "Well, we're out of it now." And he nodded his head. He meant he knew he was going to England. He didn't have to follow Hitler's order anymore. We went back to the exact spot. After going to England, we took the prisoners and the wounded over to Southampton. The next morning we reloaded. We went back to France on Omaha Beach, the exact spot where we were till 3 in the afternoon. I recognized everything on the beach when we were out there. I even watched the 101st go down the ladder, rope ladder, to get on the LCVP to go to the beach on D-Day. I'm sure none of them ever revived. They didn't know what they were getting into. But we went back there, and I got off the ship. We always hit the beach at flank speed. Tide was 18 foot. We go in at high tide. We get in there to get the military stuff on solid land. The tide goes out. Water's 200 feet behind us. I get off the ship and walked around. Went to the far end, and on back there was an LCI. I couldn't see the number. An 88 had hit it. Both ramps on both sides for the infantry to get off were loaded with the dead, burned dead. They hadn't got around to tidying them up. That was on the morning of the 8th of June, 2 days after 6th. We reloaded and left there. When I left there, we went back to England, reloaded, went back to Gold Beach. I remember Gold Beach. I turned 21 on Gold Beach that night. Bombers was in. And from No Gold Beach, we went back. On the 16th of June, they used a V-1 bomb for the first time. We went past the White Cliffs of Clover, up the Thames River, and picked up the British soldiers from a camp up there on the LST, and we went to Juno Beach, put them ashore. There, we hit an anchor going in. It was night. We made smoke. Smoke, you can't see the hand in front of your face. And bombers were coming in, so the small boats were all, and those LCVPs, were all equipped with smoke machines. They all made smoke. We hit an anchor that had dropped from the LST next to us, ripped our bottom out. While the wire was out, the tank was out, the welders welded it fast, cut the cable, which is better than 2 inches. The next morning, tide came in. We went out. We went back to England, Plymouth, England, to get a bottom put in. They sent us to Penarth, north in Scotland. It took 31 days. I never got on Sword Beach until the 40th anniversary. My wife and I was over, and we walked back on the beach. Same beach. Is my 10 minutes up?
Yes.
I got lots more I could tell you, but I can't. You can't do it. I'm glad to know you. I got a souvenir from Tokyo. The Roosevelt Hotel. Signed on a kid door. Toilet. Out of order. That's my souvenir. I was in Okinawa as well.
Thank you very much. Some of my students are taking notes here for an assignment, and I think some of the humor is going to be definitely showing up. Next, I'd like to bring to you U.S. Army Corporal, 42 to 45, Mr. Harry Ashburn. Applause, please. Thank you.
I'm not as fortunate as Marion. I don't remember everything that happened. Unfortunately, there's a couple of holes in my story that I can't recapture, and I regret that. But going back to October of 1942, I was expecting to be drafted within a couple of months, and I had the opportunity to enlist in the Army which I did after having grown up through the Depression, such as all of these people up here did too. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to be shoeless for a period of time. But while I don't recommend it as a growth factor for anybody else, it didn't hurt me, I don't think. But after going into the service, I was assigned to the 23rd Quartermaster Truck Regiment, who were then on maneuvers in Louisiana. Coming straight out of induction center, we got our basic training while we were on maneuvers, which was a little unusual. And then in December, a couple months later, we shipped out for Camp Stoneman, California, knowing we were going overseas to the Pacific. We sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge on my 20th birthday, and I celebrated that by getting royally seasick, which I did on every time I was on any kind of a ship while we were transporting in the Army. Now, the 3-week trip on the ocean to New Caledonia was pretty much uneventful, except for crossing the equator. And on the ship's PA system, they had some great big band music. Well, we got in New Caledonia at Noumea with physical conditioning going on for our next move. Here we celebrated this by adjusting to the water with a company-wide case of diarrhea. Our next stop, our assignment for the next several months, was in the island of Espiritu Santo in the New Hebrides. We're transporting every kind of supplies imaginable, which were going on to fronts such as Guadalcanal and further on up the line. After 6 months in New Hebrides, we went to the island of New Georgia in the Solomons, where we were getting into the second phase of the battle. We were camped there on a recent battle site, which was marked by a number of hasty burial sites of American soldiers. Now, anyone that's ever been around a decomposing body know how bad that can be. But we went on, and the primary target, our job in New Georgia, was to rebuild the airstrip to accommodate the big B-24 bombers. Our salute there goes to the Seabees, who did a fantastic job. We were honored to be able to supply them a lot of the supplies in there for their work, for the construction work. We hauled some bombs for the bombers and everything. Scary thing on one time, we saw one of those bombs smoking. But we cleared out in a hurry. They called for ordnance, and those talented guys were able to get that thing corrected. Well, after the New Georgia thing was wiped up, we worked around the shifts there on roads which were primarily mud, hauling everything imaginable, not only for the Air Force, for the Seabees, but certainly for the Army too. Next, we went on to the island of Bougainville, also in the Solomons, where we faced, among other things, a counterattack by the Japanese. Late in 1944, we became aware that something was heading our way, something big. We didn't know what. Those of you who have been in the service know how the rumor mill flies. We heard everything imaginable. So we were getting ready to ship out. On the last night, we had one of the most singular experiences of my career in the Army. We were sitting around, as we often did, singing. One company of truck drivers and truckers, singing popular songs of the day, when someone suggested late in the day, let's sing some hymns. Well, we had some little booklets there that had hymns in it, so we sang several of those, feeling pretty good. And finally, it was suggested, let's sing Nearer, My God, to Thee. We didn't know where we were going. We thought of the Titanic and the place that hymn played there. And I'll tell you, you should have heard that bunch sing. Mormon Tabernacle Choir never sounded better. And the next, we got on our ship to head for Hollandia, New Guinea, which was our gathering point for where we found out we were going now. We were going to be in on the invasion of the island of Luzon in the Philippines. On our way to Hollandia on our big troop ship, we got stuck on a reef. The interesting thing there was standing there stuck and seeing all the sharks in the water. Well, we didn't have to face them head on. They got us off the ships by clambering down the nets, as invasion forces often do. Got on the land, missed our Christmas dinner because they left it on the ship. So guess what we had for Christmas dinner? Spam. Well, the next move, of course, was on to Luzon, where we became part of the biggest invasion force of the Pacific War. Now, it did not reach the scale and activity of some of the bigger ones, thankfully. But we got on there, landed, and we were there probably because of the influence of General MacArthur, who had a lot of influence, of course. They were supposed to originally bypass the Philippines and go on to Formosa. But he wouldn't have it because he was going to return, remember. So we landed on there, and his goal then was to get to Manila as soon as possible. So we landed at the northern end of the island, Lingayen Gulf, worked our way down within a month, got to Manila. We were one of the first groups into Manila when it was retaken by our infantry. It was a little exciting on the way sometimes, but we survived that. Of course, that's a case of, I think most of us up here, we've been survivors most of our lives. Now, after a while, most of the work we were doing was hauling all over the island. Even though we'd taken the north, taken Manila, a lot of activity in the central part of the island. And we were hauling everything imaginable again, including troops. Now, the one thing I mentioned a while ago, I had a hole in my memory. At one point, they asked for volunteers, which you're not supposed to do, of course. I mean, to volunteer, to take some of our infantrymen behind the Japanese lines. Now, it was somewhere in central Luzon. It was somewhere in late spring or early summer. We took them, we dropped them. They didn't know what was going on. We didn't know, but we were glad to get the heck out. Also in that time, I don't know whether you saw the movie The Great Raid, of the liberation of many of our Americans who were prisoners of the Japanese and at Cabanatuan in the Philippines. There was a great movie made about that. We rescued all 500 plus of our prisoners there without a loss of a prisoner. Shortly after that, I would like to say I was in on it, but I wasn't. But shortly after that, we were delivering supplies to a hospital. We saw some of these prisoners, ex-prisoners, cleaned up, dressed up, the most emaciated, skinny people you ever saw in your life. I hope to talk to them because a friend of mine from high school was one of those prisoners. I wanted to know whether he had survived. I didn't know until long after the war that he did survive, though. Okay, as the transporting went on in all parts of the island, we were on Cavite, Bataan, Olongapo, you name it, we were there. Then, getting late into August and the dropping of the autumn bombs, we knew then the war was coming. Now, people, I know there's different opinions on the necessity of that. People take my word for it, it was necessary. Many lives were lost, true, but many, many more were saved. And at that time, before the war was over, I was one of my company designated for some reason that I don't know yet as key personnel. We were to go back to the States for 60 days leave, come back and participate in the invasion of Japan. Well, on August the 14th, unless anybody check on the date, remember I was on the other side of the international date line. On August the 14th, sitting in the orderly room waiting for my transportation to Manila to go home, it came over the radio, the announcement, the Japanese had surrendered. The war was over. I knew strongly that I wouldn't be going back after my visit home, and we were grateful for that. Well, we got on a ship to come home. For the first time in my war experience, I did not get seasick. My frame of mind might have had something to do with that, I guess. So we were on home, and I landed in San Francisco under the Golden Gate again. And it was cold after being in those tropical islands all that time. It was cold. But I remember our first meal served to us a T-bone steak, French fries, served by German prisoners of war. That was one of the eating highlights of my career in the Army. Well, we got back there and I found out as we left Manila on our ship, we were sailing out of the harbor, 2 American troop ships were coming in. Close enough we couldn't see, we saw people, we didn't know who they were, all waving and everything, and I found out later my brother was on one of those. Well, we got back to the States. I got my leave, went to Fort Dix, New Jersey for 60 days leave, went back and got discharged. At that point, this child of the Depression of World War II had the opportunity to go to college on a GI Bill. I had a 36-year career in the public school education of Hawaii. Met my longtime sweetheart, married her, raised 2 fine sons, helped raise 2 grandsons, and now in the recent years, that's been complete. We have 2 beautiful great-granddaughters. People, what a country!
We certainly agree with that. Thank you very much, Mr. Ashburn. Now we go to the second Harry on your schedule there today, U.S. Army Staff Sergeant, Battle of the Bulge, Stalag, as you can tell, 7-A, Mr. Harry Christie.
Thank you. 1942, on Armistice Day, which is November the 11th then, it's now Veterans Day, I married my wife, Anna Marie, and 6 weeks later I was drafted into the Army and spent my basic training at Camp Pendleton, Virginia. Went overseas into England, across the Channel into France, and our first battle was at New Orleans. It's called New Orleans over there, I guess, but it was south of St. Lo, and we supported. I was in the 12th Corps, and field artillery was supporting of the infantry divisions and the armored divisions, and we continually supported them through St. Lo up through Paris. And in November that year, we hit a snag. We were in one gun position for about 2 weeks, and it rained every day, I think. And you know, an artillery piece, you don't have a parking lot to park it in. You park it out in some farmer's field, and you can imagine what it was for 2 weeks of rain. It was miserable. But anyway, after the election that year, when FDR was elected for his 4th term, we moved on and we fired our first shot into Germany on December 1st. 2 days later, we were in Germany. And in the middle of December then, we got a notice. I was in Patton's 3rd Army, and Patton got an order to go north. There was a battle. The Germans had a counterattack up around in Belgium and near Bastogne, and we were to go up there and help support, get those troops out of Bastogne. And our mission was to fire on their supply lines and their troop movements. We got up there that night, and it was the middle of the night, and temperature was about 12 below zero. It was 0 during the daytime. They had 10 to 12 inches of snow, and it was miserable. We got a fire mission one afternoon that our forward observer had noticed that there was about 200 Germans that went into a woods and probably for a bivouac for the night. So we got orders to fire on that woods. Field Artillery Battalion has 5 batteries, there's about 500 men, and there's a headquarters battery, service battery, and 3 firing batteries. And each firing battery has 4 guns, which meant 12 guns. So usually each battery was firing on different opponents, but this time they put all 3 batteries on that woods. We fired about 10 rounds apiece, which means about 120 rounds hit that woods. And if you want to know about a field artillery piece, our gun was a 4.5, about a 30-pound shell, and it's about 4 inches in diameter. And when they go off when they detonate, when they hit the ground or hit something. And an ordinary artillery piece, when it hits the ground, hits the ground and it goes like this. You can be laying on the ground 5 feet from that where it hits off and he won't be hit. But when you shoot them into a woods, they hit the trees, the shells goes this way. So you can imagine what 120 shells did to that woods. The infantry moved out, moved through the woods, never fired a shot. There was nobody left. That's not pretty, I know. That 200 men lost their lives. But if we hadn't did that, who knows next day how many of Americans or Allied forces would have been wiped out by those 200 men that we killed. 2 days later, it was Christmas, and history will tell you what happened then. The skies opened and the snow quit. And the American bombers came over and they bombed the German troops, and the Germans couldn't give up fast enough then. They surrendered a lot of them were surrendering and the rest of them were running. We chased them across Belgium into Luxembourg into Germany. And Patton wanted to take Berlin, and we got within 60 miles of Berlin. And everybody knows what happened when Stalin and Churchill and Roosevelt met at Yalta. They agreed to let the Russians take Berlin because of what had happened in Stalingrad. So they ordered Patton to go south. We went south to Munich, and down from Munich we went down to the Danube River. And I remember the bridge, the Germans had blown the bridge across the Danube River into Regensburg. But the engineers, the American engineers, had built a pontoon bridge. As I pulled my gun onto the pontoon bridge, a Jeep pulled in behind me. And as we crossed the bridge, we noticed that where the license plate would be on a Jeep, there was a red plate with 3 silver stars on it. And it was General Patton. I was always so glad I got to see him. As we pulled off on the other side of the bridge, he passed us and he saluted us and went on. But I can always say that I saw General Patton. That was on May 1st in 1945. We went into Regensburg. We had been in combat for 249 consecutive days. We hadn't slept in a bed since we left England. We'd slept on the ground or in a Jeep or something. We got into Regensburg and we got noticed that that was our last day in combat, that the front had got so narrow that there wasn't enough room for all the American troops, so they were pulling them back, and we got pulled back. So that was probably the happiest day of the war for me. But on top of that, they told us that the German people that lived in Regensburg had vacated the town, and they left in a hurry, and they told us to find a house and get a bed. And man, we got in the house, electricity was still on, the water was on, we got a hot shower, cleaned up, and got to sleep in a bed for the first time in 249 days.
Oh my.
It was great. The next day, the quartermaster came and took our guns. They left us with 6x6 trucks, and we were told we were to go to Moosburg, Germany. There was a prisoner of war camp there called Stalag 7A. And history says there's about 17 to 19,000 German or prisoners, American Allied prisoners that were in that camp occupied by the Germans. And we went up there, and our job was to get those prisoners of war home. And it was pitiful. That I don't know how anybody could live like they did. It was dirty. They didn't have enough food. All of them looked so skinny. And I met a kid from Dayton. He was been in her. He probably didn't weigh 100 pounds. And his name was David Moore. He lived out on East 3rd Street in Dayton. But anyway, we started to get them ready, and the quartermaster brought us up portable showers and got the Americans first, got them showered, got them clean uniforms, and we formed a convoy. We weren't the only outfit that was doing this. There were several outfits together, and we all worked together, formed a convoy with about 20, 25 soldiers on a truck, and took them back to Bamberg, where they were loaded on boxcars. They weren't Pullman cars, they were boxcars on a train. And the train took them back to Paris, where they were flown back to the United States to get home with their families. That was something to see. We took the Americans home first, and then we got the British out and took them home. And on May the 8th, we were on our way back to Bamberg with another group of French. And that's when we got the notice that Germany had surrendered, signed a peace, and that was the end of the war. I don't know what happened to the Russian prisoners, because they didn't want to go home. Russia, when they are enlisted or join the army, they sign a vow that they will fight to the end. So they knew they surrendered, so they didn't want to go home and face them. But I was so glad that I was blessed. I got to come home. My wife met me, and I had a 1.5-year-old son. My wife and I had 69 years together. She died in 2012. We had 5 boys, 4 of them served in the Air Force, 3 of them in the Vietnam War, and 1 in the Gulf War, Persian Gulf. And I have a grandson that graduated from the Air Force Academy, and he's now he served in Afghanistan. He's now serving in the Air Force in Atlanta. So I'm so thankful. I've been blessed, and I have so many good memories. I have some bad memories, but the good memories are so much better than the other. I want to thank each and everyone here that came to hear this today, and may God bless you, and God bless America.
Thank you very much. We go from those final days and the liberation to Mr. Les Edsall, U.S. Army Captain, prisoner of war in Poland and Germany. Mr. Edsall.
I'm Lester Edsall. I was inducted into the Army I'm not inducted, but I was married to Edie on the 2nd of November, and on the 7th of December was Pearl Harbor. So my honeymoon was cut short. But I was signed into the Army the middle of July of 1942, and I took my basic at Camp Croft in South Carolina, and then was sent to OCS, and from there I was assigned as a platoon leader in the Yankee Division, which is the 26th Yankee Division the Massachusetts National Guard unit. So that's the unit that I served in for the balance of my service. We didn't go overseas until September of 44, after all of the Germans had been cleared out from pushed back from the cliffs and the beaches, and they were working on clearing off the Cherbourg Peninsula when we got over there, and they had already floated some large cement block docks or whatever to rebuild the Cherbourg Harbor, which the Germans had completely destroyed when they left that area. So we landed in Cherbourg and were put in reserve to later join Patton's Third Army, which he, if you remember, he had broken through the defense, German defense, and had rushed across France and got over around Nancy, and he ran out of gas and supplies, so he had to stop short of Paris. And so he was in a holding position, and our outfit was then sent up to relieve him on the front lines. And so I think it was in October that we went up there. Meanwhile, we had some bad luck on the beaches. In order to keep us in shape, they let us exercise and go along certain paths and roadways that were safe. And one of our company officers, got off the beaten path and stepped on a mine and was killed. And so I was given his platoon, which was the 4th platoon in the company. And that was just a month before we were going to go into combat. So when we did take off in November, I wasn't really familiar with many of the boys that I was going to be fighting with. Nevertheless, we started the assault I wanted to tell you, there's one little thing I always tell everybody. When we entered the line, a couple of days after we entered the line and relieved Patton's troops, my runner and I were in the foxhole together, and the Germans periodically would send over a barrage and just to keep you honest, I guess. But one time, about the second or third day we were on the line, we were in our foxhole, and all of a sudden we were just completely covered with dirt and debris, and it was a real shocker. And I checked with my runner, and he was okay, and I was okay. So we found out that a shell had landed right on the edge of our foxhole, and the loose dirt that was thrown up out of the hole was shoved down in the foxhole all over us, and that's what the debris was. But the point is that if the trajectory of the shell had been another 6 inches, it would have landed in the foxhole with us, and I wouldn't be here telling you this story. So that was quite an initiation for us, for my runner and myself. But getting back to the
Les, could I interrupt a minute? Les has written a wonderful book about his experience as a prisoner of war. And I know that we don't have time to hear all of that. So Les, could you move to, you're in the circle of light. The Germans give you an hour to surrender, or they're going to wipe you all out. And then tell us about what it was like being a POW, the horrible, horrible circumstances you went through. Because I think that's what people would love to hear today.
What does she want?
Your time in the POW camp.
I'm sorry, Les. I thought you could probably hear.
What,
You'll have to turn the volume up for him, Carl. Just go ahead and turn it up, Carl. Your volume.
Oh, my volume.
Your volume, yeah.
Yeah, they want you to discuss your time as a POW.
yes.
There we go. Good.
And how your commanding officer put you in that position.
I was taken prisoner on November the 13th of 44 on my daughter's first birthday. We had gotten in through some blunders and poor judgment, bad leadership. We had gotten into an indefensible position, and we were 2.5 miles ahead of our flanking protection, and so the Germans decided that they could encircle us and capture us, since we had no artillery or tanks, and so they counterattacked us, and I was captured that night at long about midnight. I was put in on a vehicle and taken back behind their lines and put in a cell at one of the villages, evidently. And then the next day, they took me back to a camp, which was the sort of a as processing center for prisoners, and it was called Limburg, the town of Limburg. They took everything that I had that was GI, but they left me keep my wedding band and a New Testament, and so that camp I was at until they decided where to send me. I was taken out of the camp at one time and put in solitary confinement at an old castle Dietz, D-I-E-T-Z or something like that. And there had been there had been quite a few there ahead of me. And the wall had been painted white, and then they had put rows of dots on there to break it up, the monotony of it, I guess. So, and off to the side were a large number of figures. And so I found out that by counting the dots myself, that those were the totals that the other ones that had gone before me had come to. And then we were introduced to cattle cars and rail transportation. The cars were meant for cattle, evidently, but the Germans would put a fencing of some sort to divide the car in half, and the prisoners were put on one side, and the guards were put on the other. So there were no. Sometimes there were no facilities for personal needs, and sometimes they were very primitive. And we traveled, I traveled from there, Limburg, to camp clear over in Poland. And it was called Off-Flag 64. And I was, again, my luck held. It's probably the best POW camp that the Germans had. And it was nothing like Hogan's Heroes. It was all ground force officers. It was run by. It was headed by the camp. What happens? The Germans would assign the senior officer to be in charge of all of the his men in the camp. So our camp was run very much with the military style, whereas I understand some of the, forgive me, the Air Force camps were a little bit looser in their relationships between the officers and the men. And so they had a more casual effect. But ours was, rank was observed and respected, and by both the Germans and the Americans. And when I arrived there, some of those prisoners had been captured down in South Africa, so they already had been prisoners for a couple of years.
I don't want to be rude, but I know that there are all sorts of people that need to go on, and I really invite you, if you want a summary, because the experience he had just tears your heart out, I'll be glad to email or mail anybody a summary. But I know that some of you, I don't want people to start leaving before these other people get to talk less. And I also promised that I'll write a column for the Piqua, Sydney, and Troy papers about Les's experience but I know that some of you absolutely cannot stay. So I would really prefer, Les, that we bring your the horror that he went through. He's talking about being in the camp now where they were officers. Then he moves on to talk about marching in the snow and the cold with no food, with a loaf of bread for 10 days. And something that was supposed to be like hot soup, but it was nothing, no nutrients. And so we thank you so much, Les. We're so sorry that you had to endure what you had to endure. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And I do say yes, sir. This gentleman definitely outranks me. I was a first lieutenant. It chokes me up thinking about what they've gone through. Next on our program here, of course, as you're looking through that, you're waiting for this beautiful young lady here to speak. And this is Mrs. Nadine Nagel, WASP pilot, Congressional Gold Medal, 1942 to 1944. Mrs. Nagel.
Thank you very much. For so many years, the WASP didn't know who we were.
Guys, she's going to be 97. Can you believe that?
I am so happy to be here. So anyway, I'm to talk about the WASP. Well, I was born on a Kansas farm, a wheat farm with the beautiful parents. They were good farmer people. And I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And we had typical family relationships in the time of the Depression. And then, well, good for that. I guess I'm. Well, my phone is still, my microphone is still on, isn't it?
Yes.
So I'll keep talking then. So anyway, I was born in the Kansas farm and during the Depression, and I went to school like everybody else, and I went to college, and I was going to be a teacher. And while I was at college, I met my fiance, and he was going to be a teacher also, and so. We both started our teaching careers in 1940 and planning to be married before too many months. And then at the Pearl Harbor, a affair came, and that's completely ruined our plans. So Dale Canfield was my fiance, and so he, in the beginning of the war, he became a cadet to be a pilot. And he graduated in the summer of 42. And we were married in April 43. No, 42. And we started a very happy life together, except that he had to go overseas as a B-24 pilot that August after we were married for 5 months. And then in January 43, he was killed in a crash coming back from the bombing the coast of France where the sub bases were. So that ruined my life. I didn't know what to do because we had so many plans of the future. Well, I decided that if he wasn't here as long as he wasn't here, I would fly in his place. And I thought, I've never been in an airplane before. I've never been near one. So that led me to take flying. I heard about Jackie Cochran and the training program that she was having for women who were going to be possibly military pilots in the Army Air Force. So I decided that's what I will do. If Dale isn't here to fly, I'll fly in his place. And like I said, I've never been near a plane before. So I found out the requirements, and you had to have a pilot's license before you could apply for the program. Well, that stumped me a little bit, but I went I went to Wichita, Kansas, and got my pilot's license. Then I applied for the program, and there were a lot of other applications had to be filled out too. And so I passed the flight test. I got my license. Then I applied for the training program with Jackie Cochran. And there were 25,000 women who applied for the program. Of that number, 2,830 were accepted into the training program. And of that number, 1,074 graduated with a silver wings. Thankfully, I was one of them. When we got to Sweetwater for training, they took us down out to Avenger Field in a cattle car. The cattle cars really were cattle cars, but they had cleaned them out and put benches in, so that was the way we were transported at Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas. That's where our training was. And so I entered the class of 44 W9, which was the next to the last class that graduated before the program was disbanded. So I started the program and started the flight training, and we had 3 stations of flight training. We had the PT-17, BT-13, and the AT-6. And the AT-6 was one of the favorite planes that all of us loved it because it was so convenient and easy to fly. And our academics were, and the physical flying was exactly the same program as what the men cadets had. Jackie Cochran was so sure that we would be admitted into the Air Force as full-fledged pilots that she was very, very strong that we kept the military in every sort of way, and every class and flight that we had was exactly like the men pilots had to do. So I got through that program and graduated in November 1944. And then I was assigned with some other WASPs to Lubbock Field when I graduated. And at that field, we did administrative and some ferrying assignments. And I'll tell you a couple of the flights I did make as a pilot there, forget the fee. Lubbock, excuse me. See, I have memories locked sometimes. So thanks for your help. And so anyway, one of my flights out of Lubbock was to take 5 non-flying officers on a business trip to San Antonio from Lubbock. So we went down, and it was to be a daytime flight, and the AT-10 is a twin engine, but since it was a day flight and everything, they thought, well, I could do it alone, which I took them down, okay? Well, when we got down there, the meetings were lasting longer, and when we found out what time we were going to take off, I thought, oh, this is going to be a night flight. And so I was prepared because we did have the training for night flying very, very much under our belts. And so I took them home that night. We followed the beam. We had to fly the beam in those days. Didn't have these fancy instruments to follow these days. And we got them home okay. And I always said when they got off the plane that night, and we said good night, everything, I said there was probably a lot of loving going on that night. For their husbands to be home safe from having a woman pilot home, bring him home. And then another flight that I had assignment at Lubbock was there was at Garden City, Kansas, there had been a B-13 training base for the men to learn to fly. And so at this time, since the war was coming to an end, they had lots of airplanes, BT-13s at the Garden City. So a group of us went up in a C-47 to check out planes and then fly them down. Each one of us had a plane to fly down to San Antonio. And it so happened that it was late in November at that time, so it was very dark then too. So it was a night flight for me. But you would not believe the zillions of lights around San Antonio to try to find the airport that we were supposed to land. Well, I found it okay. But anyway, we did that a couple of times. We would go back in the C-47, and that's where I got a little bit of co-pilot time. They let us fly. We weren't checked out, of course, but in the co-pilot seat, I got some experience of co-pilot at C-47, and then later on I got a co-pilot of B-25. So the assignment at Lubbock was wonderful. And let's see, after that, it was about the time that I'm leaving something out. I don't know what I'll remember.
I want you to tell them after they disbanded and you had to find your own way home and you weren't considered a veteran and all of that until, and then what you did because you couldn't be a WASP anymore, what you decided you'd do instead.
What was that?
See, I know all their stories. I love their stories.
I think I better let her be up here instead of me.
No. When they disbanded this group, these women had to find their own way home, their own transportation.
Oh, yes.
And she was so sad. And she has some really funny stories about things she did, flyovers and stuff, waving at people and whatnot, friends and family. Tell them what you did after they disbanded the WASP and you said, I want to serve. I'm not through yet.
Oh, yes.
And then the congressional, look at this, guys, around her neck and all that. And when she was finally considered a veteran.
Okay, where should I start now?
It's disbanded because we've got to let
okay. We got to let what?
Bob Tweed talk.
Okay. All right. Okay. We got disbanded. and I had to find my way home. And I didn't want to get out of the uniform yet. I was so proud to be a WASP. I was so happy and so happy that I did not want to get out of the uniform. The war was still on. So I joined the American Red Cross. And I was in training, and I became a recreational director for the Red Cross for 2 years. And I was stationed at San Antonio, Texas, Wichita Falls in Texas, and Rantoul at in Illinois, in the base there, Chinook Field, Illinois. Well, that's where I met my second husband. So that changed my life too. So I served 2 years with the American Red Cross. Then I got out and I got married and spent a few years raising a family and going back to teaching. And then my life continued. I practiced this at home, but I didn't do so. There's so much to say, I don't know what to say.
Isn't she incredible, guys? Thank you, Megan.
Really, I don't have to say more. I enjoyed being. Let me tell you this. I have a family. I have four wonderful children, 10 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. And each one of them are a pleasure of my life.
Mrs. Nagel, you'd be invited to my communication classes any day. Yes. I would love to have you there.
I accept.
You're welcome. In fact, I have a class normally at 1:30. The 1:30 students, if you're here, please enjoy staying here.
Terry's going to take me home by then.
Whatsoever. Well, that's much better here than there for this certain time. Well, you've got to follow that, Mr. Tweed. Another Army captain, again, I give preference to that as I was a first lieutenant. He's certainly pulling rank. But if you invite and have a hand of applause again now for Robert Tweed, Battle of the Bulge, and shout.
Thank you. I don't mean to pull rank, and I'll be honest and say I only got those captain's bars for the final when I got out of the service. I got a bump up of a month's vacation and a pair of captain bars. But I'm not at ease in front of a crowd like this, I just have to admit. And the one thing that I am at ease with is when a bunch of guys like this get together and we have a couple of drinks and then we get to lying to each other. And some of those stories get bigger every time. I was really a washout of the Air Force. I'd gone into the Air Force as a transferee. I'd been in an anti-aircraft outfit and thought that it looked better if I could be flying instead of shooting them down. We couldn't shoot them down anyway, hardly. Most of the time, I want to say to this lady in the podium that while I was in the anti-aircraft, we would go into the Mojave Desert and fire we had automatic 40mm cannons then, and we would go on the range to fire, and I didn't find out until later that there was a terrible mistake made with somebody's scoping or whatever, and one of the planes that was towing a target was shot down. And I found out later in the service that that plane was being pulled by a lady, pulling a target for the. Yeah. And so I salute her if she was one of those in that group. But it was a sad thing that happened. But anyway, to get back to where I ended up, after being in the Air Force for 1 month at the Amarillo Air Base, we were all washed out. They said 35,000 of us at one time. The order came down, all the troops from the ground will be transferred back to the ground. So next shipment I was on ended up in Camp Hahn. Well, Camp Hahn was the camp where I was in the anti-aircraft, and then I was into the infantry at Camp Gruber, Oklahoma, and didn't have any idea that I wanted to be in the infantry, but that's where I was, and all of the I don't remember what to call those things, but when I got to there, we got unloaded and went into the entrance to the camp. It was well done. A bunch of nice flagstone work, stonework, and the guys that were doing the work were all wearing little short pants. It was in March, and no shirts. And I found out those were all German prisoners. They were laying up some nice approach work for the camp with the thing looking like a flying buttresses to enter the camp of the 42nd Infantry Division. And that was something everybody was proud of, and they'd made a glorious record in World War I with the commander-in-chief, or the not the commander-in-chief, but the chief of staff was General MacArthur for World War I in the 42nd Division. But anyway, we were subjected to a lot of training, difficult training, and everybody that's been in the service has gone through it. And then finally, the heavy work had already been done. The guys that went ashore there in Utah and those places had already done the dirty work, and we were shipped then, but shipping was a problem. In the U-boats had made terrific strides on our shipping. And so we couldn't ship as a division because we couldn't take our artillery and all our heavy equipment, trucks and transportation. So they wanted infantrymen. So our 3 infantry regiments shipped over there separately. And I began to think that the people who were driving those boats didn't know where they were going, because we were 14 days going across the ocean. And I'd look to see where the sun was one day, and it would be in the wrong place, and we'd be going north, and then we'd be going south, and finally it took 14 days to get about a five-day crossing done. And we didn't go into a channel. We went into Gibraltar and into the Mediterranean, and we unloaded at Marseille, and we went up to a staging area out of Marseille for about 3 or 4 days until they could get some 40 and 8 trains together to haul us up into the Strasbourg area of France. And after they loaded us about, we got off at Strasbourg. Well, let me say one thing that's been on my mind for a long time too. We never got I want to say something about the hardships, not only the glorious part of the war, but the hardships, because we left on Thanksgiving. We left our Camp Gruber, and we were in the same clothing, the same underwear, until Easter. And I thought that deserved a little special. We couldn't get close to anybody by that time. Anyway, we were in the terrible business up there at the excuse the mental lapses. At Bastogne, where the breakthrough had occurred, had demanded all kinds of stuff, and so we started out as a task force. We were not a division. We were Task Force Linden, because he was the brigadier that was in charge of us. And they were shoving us wherever we were necessary. And I do remember we changed positions 5 times in 2 days. We would be in the 7th Army. We first went into the 7th Army. Then they would say, well, the attack didn't come here where we thought it might, so they put us in alligators. We called them alligators. Ducks, I think, became a word later used. And we would load into those, drive an hour or so, and they'd say, unload. Okay, dig in here. The tanks will be coming from that direction. So we had little dinky entrenching tools that were just a little spade on that with a handle. All these guys know what it was. And trying to dig through a 4-inch frost with a dinky entrenching tool was impossible. You gave up after a while.
Bob, it is so important for my students who are here, for you to tell your story at the Battle of the Bulge when you didn't have the resources you need. I know that it makes you cry and it makes me cry, but they need to know about your particular unit without the resources you need. They need to know about your being sent to Dachau the day after the Americans liberated it to bear witness to the atrocities there. And I know it's painful and it make you cry. It'll make me cry. But people need to hear that. So would you please share that?
Well, yes, I'd be glad to. I think all of you have seen some of those pictures that were made of that camp. I had a division general who came over, well, the full division got over there after about in the first part of March. And General Collins was the division commander. And he said he had never seen anything like this. Part of our division, the 222nd Infantry Regiment, made the attack fronting with 45th Division when they went into Dachau. My infantry regiment was about 50 miles away, but the division commander said he wanted everybody to representations from every company. So my company commanders told me to take my Jeep driver and another non-com and go see what was supposed to be shown. So when we got over there, it was just as bad as you have seen those pictures, and there were still a few bodies floating in the moat. There was a moat surrounding Dachau, and a lot of rail cars. It must have been a train of 20 or 30 cars, all box cars, locked up. And when they broke the locks on the outer doors and got in there, they were all full of people headed for the concentration camp, but they'd been in that train for 5 days, unfed, no water, locked in. The train had been sitting on a siding there at Camp Dachau. So when we broke the locks on the cars and opened it up, there was one live man left in that, out of all those cars, one live person. So I remember they tried to get him to live, and I never did hear whether he made it or not. But we got the medics in. But looking over the camp, our commander said he wanted these representations from every company just so that they could never in the future deny what was going on over there, the terrible things they were doing. So as you walked into this camp, there was a big, long barracks, which had, they told them they were going to take a shower, of course, but everybody got stripped afterward, and the shower was a bunch of gas, and they would kill them, and then they would take all the clothes off of them and put them through the furnaces and burn them up. But the amazing things that never got, I don't think it was ever thrown away anything, because there were stacks of shoes, big piles of clothing. And one thing I never could understand, there were large piles of hair. And apparently the people they were going to kill, they didn't want them to have anything in that. But what use could you make of a pile of hair? I never could figure out. Then after that, we got into the pursuit of the German army, and it was a kind of a rout. Then most of the ones who had much intelligence all tried their best to get to a place where they could surrender. Occasionally we'd run across, we were moving south toward Munich, and we would run across resistance. And the sad part about that was by that time we'd had some tank support behind us, so we could call on a tank. And if we were fired upon out of one of those little villages we were taken through, many times there was some misguided Boy Scout or something about that age, 15 or 16-year-olds, sitting up in a steeple of a church, firing out. He was going to preserve the 1,000-year Reich by all his youthful. Well, anyway, so what we would do, instead of wanting to risk the loss of another man, we just call up that anti-tank outfit to come up there and blast that church, knock that steeple down, and it was always tragedy because it was either a little kid or an old man who they thought they were going to defend their homeland. They were blowing their bridges, which was terrible because after we moved through that area, they'd have to start building their bridges again. They'd have to start all this destruction that they were creating, trying to save the scorched earth policy so there would be nothing for the victor. And, I'm wandering off, I think. I'm sorry, I'm
It's all
taking
right.
off.
It's your 10 minutes. When we arranged this program months and months ago, I was very nervous, and there is a person who is not able to come here today, and he asked me to speak for him, and he approved what I am saying. It'll take about 2 minutes for me to say it. One of my students wrote recently about the ways in which military personnel serve, with no idea of how their stories will end. He wrote of one of the veterans being honored here today, quote, "I'm thankful that your story did not end during World War II and that you're here to share your story now to our generation." In addition to the 6 World War II veterans whose stories you are hearing today, I'm here to speak on behalf of Lieutenant Junior Grade Bill Brower, who served in the U.S. Navy from 43 to 46. Bill wanted to be here with you, but he's had serious stomach surgery this summer, and when I called him, he said, "Vivian, I'm bedridden. I can't." I said, "God's going to speak to you, and I'm going to call you Thursday morning, and you're going," but he's not.
Yeah.
Bill was captain of a small ship, an LCT, that's called a landing craft tank, which he named the Nancy M, in the Philippines after the war ended. His job and that of the men he commanded was to rid the Philippines of the Japanese as well as American machinery of war by dumping it in the Verde Island Passage in the Pacific Ocean. Remember, the Japanese occupied the Philippines within hours of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and they were there until they surrendered in 1945. Eliminating and destroying military equipment is a critical part of any war maneuver, as we now are aware today that in the Middle East, our own equipment is now being used against us. A sculptor, a painter, a poet, a professor, Bill had a career on the New York stage. That's how he used his veterans benefit to get trained to be an actor. And in television, in the early 50s, performing in Ford and Kraft Theater, as well as Studio One. A graduate of the University of Virginia with an advanced degree from Columbia, Bill is a professor emeritus at Princeton Theological Seminary, where he used his powerful voice to teach seminarians how to communicate effectively to their future congregations. Bill and his talent, energetic, and beautiful wife, Nora Lee, have a special place in my heart because of their willingness to use their special talents to educate my students and me. Picture this. My students in a communication class are doing role playing to help our area law enforcement personnel gain special competence and certification to work with a complex citizenry, individuals with mental illnesses, drug addicts, alcoholics, the elderly with dementia. Who's right there with them, with my students and me and the cops that are learning to deal with particularly troublesome people? Pat Ashburn, Harry's wife, and Nora Lee, with both embracing the opportunity to help law enforcement and loving every minute of working with my students. And then I met Bill and learned about his background in theater. Picture Bill in a large Edison classroom, overflowing with my class and others, as well as community members. Dressed in a black turtleneck, crisp slacks with a mop of white hair, Bill enters the room, perches on a stool, and begins to quote from memory the poetry of Robert Frost. Poem after poem with commentary between the poems that's warm, informative, and at times humorous. He has all of us on the edge of our seats, breathless, and then he asks someone to turn off the lights. It's Halloween time. The room is pitch black, and he begins to quote The Witch of Coos. I mean, we were terrified. His third time at Edison, and I'm sure it was his last, was this spring in April. We had Poem in My Pocket Day, and Bill can not only quote all of Robert Frost, he can quote hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of American and British poets. The voice was not as strong, but the magic was still there, and we all were in awe of the presence of this powerful man. So, in addition to all of these people whom I consider my friends, I've heard their stories. I love what they've done. I salute you today, Bill Brower, for your service to this country, for the ways in which you've inspired my students, and the ways in which you've lived a life of service to so many who've been in need of your wisdom, your talent, your charisma, your caring. I love you, Bill.
In his time I gave, the army's on its way. Count off the cadence loud and strong. For wherever we go, you will always know that the army goes rolling along.
Now, if everyone of the Navy, and families of the Navy, please stand up. Remain standing, Army. Everybody keep standing.
Anchors aweigh, my boys. Anchors aweigh. Farewell to college joys. We sail at break of day. Through our last night on shore, drink to the foam until we meet once more. Here's wishing you a happy journey home.
Now, everyone of the Marines, would you join us?
From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we will fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First to fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the title of United States Marine.
Now, if everyone of the Air Force would please join in, and anybody else that's remaining here that I know we got National Guard and Coast Guard. So if everybody now would stand up.
Yes, sir.
That's sir, and this is the Air Force.
Off we go into the wild blue yonder, climbing high into the sun. Here they come, zooming to meet our thunder. Atom boys, give her the gun. Down we dive.